3, 11 verses. I'm going to refer to some of those verses and then go to the New Testament, and hopefully we will see that there are some ingredients we need for our homes to make it better. Hopefully you have a good home, but hopefully there's room for improvement, and hopefully you're willing to improve some things. Life is not so perfect. When people get married, you have two imperfect people marrying, living together for a lifetime, and if God gives them kids, they now have compounded the problems. You now have imperfect children. So now you got imperfect husband, imperfect wife, imperfect son, imperfect daughter, and as it grows, you have a whole host of potential problems. So there's got to be some way to have the problems reduced. I don't think the problems will ever go away totally. Well, there's a time it will be done away with totally. That'll be when you get to heaven. In the meantime, I do believe that a Christian home can be a little bit of what we would say heaven on earth, with the limitations of being human still. So do not have a false expectation, but also don't have a low expectation. Don't not think that your marriage or your home could be better. Always think that it can be. But while that is very possible, it's also impossible to have a perfect marriage, a perfect home, perfect kids. Now, if you think you have perfect kids, raise your hand, and we'll step outside. We'll discuss it further in detail, because there's only perfect kids. Well, there's none, and your first one might be perfect to you. Your first child probably is the most beautiful thing in the world. Okay, the most beautiful thing in the world is your child, and then the second one is, yeah, that's all right. Then the third one comes along, and it's like, oh, who wants to boil the water now and boil and sanitize? You know, the first you sanitize everything for the first one. We did, and everything was spick and span clean. Nothing fell on the floor. If it did, it was thrown away. But you know, after the first one falls on the floor, pick it up, put it back on the plate, eat it, kid, and it's not a problem. You realize that germs are everywhere, but let's improve the home life. Let's improve by having the right kind of ingredients. Now, from our text that we read this morning, Psalm 103, I want you to see in verse number 8. Psalm 103, verse number 8. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, plenteous in mercy. He will not always chide, neither will he keep his anger forever. He hath not, and verse 10, he hath not dealt with us after our sins, nor rewarded us according to our iniquities. Now, those verses there is a real foundation, it seems like, to me anyway. In my opinion, it's a foundation for our homes and marriages, and this spills over into many kinds of relationships. Now, come to the New Testament, we'll look at two passages of Scripture that plays out these verses about the Lord being merciful, and he doesn't hold his anger. He hasn't dealt with us after our sins. We'll see two passages where this has taken place. Somebody says, well, I wish you could find an example of the perfect husband or the perfect father. I wish I could find an example of someone who displays mercy and grace. It's hard to find the human example because we're all so flawed. But there's got to be someone we look to that is the example to follow. There has to be someone that we say, that's it. That's the one. He is the one that I am to follow as my example. Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15. Let me go ahead pretty fast here because I want to cover my first point. My first point is one of 7. And these 7 points are the 7 different ingredients I think we need for our homes. Now, you know that chapter 15 is a parable full of parables about lost things. You have in chapter 15, you have a lost coin. And the woman who lost that 1 coin out of 10 made every effort possible to find and retrieve that lost coin because it's precious to her. And then the second thing we find lost is a lost sheep, and how the shepherd went out to find the lost sheep. And then you finally have this example of something being precious and lost. You have the lost son. Look at verse number 11. Luke 15, verse number 11. I'm pretty sure you know this parable. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the main points of this, but let me go over this again briefly and get to the real issue of this point that Jesus is making. Verse 11, and he said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said unto his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with righteous living. Something got into this boy's mind and head. Something got his attention, which he said, I just got to spend, I got to go, I got to experience, I got to go to this place and just live it up. It's great living here with my father and my brother, my father's got service. Everything's pretty good. Everything is orderly. Everything's under control. We've got land. We've got money. We've got food. I got a nice room to live in and sleep in. I got a water bed. I got a pool. I got a jacuzzi. I got a tennis. I got everything that I want. What more can I ask for? But there's something missing in my life, he thought. Something got bugging him, and he just felt like he had to go and experience something. So he got what he was due, but not now. But his father gave in to him and gave him all this dough, another word for money, and he took off to this far country. And there in that far country, verse number 13, he did what a foolish young man does. He doesn't think. He doesn't take care of what he has. He's got a bag full of coins. He's got a wallet full of cash. He's feeling pretty good. Maybe he is pulling a cart, a rolling cart full of his loot, his money. And he goes to this far country. He is wide-eyed, so excited. He says, here, I'm in Vegas. Oh, man, I'm going to live it up in Vegas. It wasn't Vegas. This is just the counterpart to this far country that he would go and waste his substance. And boy, can you not waste money real quick in gambling? Can you not blow everything real quick in gambling? There are people, you and I know, that they're broke. They've got a union job. They got a job that pays them $35 an hour, or they've got a secure position in some company, but they're broke. Now, there's a reason why they're broke. Vegas has something to do with it. Gambling has a lot to do with it. And he wasted his substance in righteous living, verse 14. And when he had spent all, now we don't know how much he got. He had, but he must have had a lot. But he blew it all. He spent all. Now the emphasis on everything is gone. He spent not just a portion of it, 90% of it. He spent all of it. And there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he began to be in want. Now that's interesting to me. Why he began to be in want? He began to have needs unfulfilled. He had needed a place to live, needed some food, needed some shelter, needed something like that. But where were all his friends that he had gathered? He began to be in want. I thought the friends that he had picked up, they would probably step in and say, hey, you need a place to stay tonight? Well, I don't think anybody asked him that. You look kind of gaunt today. You need something to eat? Why don't you come to my house? I'll get you something to eat. You don't look well. I don't see anything reading between the lines of his so-called friends and companions he picked up when he had money. They weren't to be found. He began to be in want. He was by himself. And there's a lesson to learn. When you've got something that people want and they're not really real friends, the word is advantage. Added to that, take advantage. If you are not careful, of course you're all careful, but if you're not careful with things, people can be very manipulative and take advantage of things, and you end up with nothing. And when you need something from them, you need help, they're nowhere to be found. You begin to be in want. It happens more than we like to think. I know a man who, we say, bless his heart. That's a southern expression to say when someone has a fault or something, and we say what it is, we criticize, then we say, bless his heart. Well, a guy buys a new bicycle, doesn't lock it up, puts it in his compartment, his friends come over, he wakes up, next day the bike is gone. Hey, what happened to the bike? I don't know. I don't know. No, nobody knows anything. All of a sudden, nobody knows anything. Oh, everything is I don't know. When he gets his check, he's got a lot of money. His friends show up, they swoop down. Hey, you hungry? You want to go Zippies? You want to go L&L? And everything happens like that on a routine. Every time a check comes in, every time these friends come around, and then the money diminishes, and then When he's got nothing, they're somewhere else. It's bye-bye. Until the next time he gets another check. And this man began to be in want. It's a very tragic thing. Now look at verse number 15. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him unto his fields to feed swine. Oh no. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husk that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. And he's at the bottom of the barrel. Verse number 17. And when he came to himself, he said, how many hired servants of my father's house, fathers have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger. Now, because of his destitution, because of his hardship, he's been to see some things. Some things he already knew. This young boy, I think, knew that what he was doing was not so smart. Did it anyway. And after he lost everything, it dawned on him, and it was reinforcing him every day. My father is rich. I have a lot back home. I shouldn't be here in this slop. I shouldn't be here like this. And he began to think. Can I tell you something? Sometimes hardship begins to get you focused on the right things. Sometimes hardship makes you stop to think about reality. Sometimes when everything's going smooth and you're doing wrong, you keep doing wrong. Sometimes when everything is really cool and you have no inconveniences, but you're doing wrong, you keep on doing wrong because why not? You know it's wrong, but you keep doing it because everything is pretty much running routine. But this man's routine began to be upset. He had nothing, and now he has to realize, and this is a good day for him. This is a good day for this young boy to realize the reality of his condition, and as he reflected upon his life with his father, he began to think how good he had it. How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough to spare? More than enough. And here I am. What am I doing here? I'm in no man's land. What am I doing here? I'm hungry. I'm starving. What am I doing here? It began to hit in the face. Verse 18, he says, I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee. Would you say this young man has seen the light? Would you say he's come to the end of himself? Would you say this young boy has realized the foolishness of his folly? Yes. Would you say this young boy has drawn a contrast in his mind? Yes. What I'm doing here and what it was like back there. By the way, do you know that in the Old Testament, quite often God says to his people, the nation of Israel, he says, look, you folks don't forget me, because when you do, you're going to backslide. And when they forgot God and all the things he had done for them, they backslid. And then the Lord chastised them, and then they were sorry, and they, oh, please, please. And God had mercy on them. And then they would forget the Lord again, and they would do wrong again. But for the Lord to get them back, he would always say, remember me, remember what I've done for you. And so there was this remembering factor. There is this thinking about how good the Lord is factor. This thinking about how good he was in his father's house factor. And he says, I've sinned against heaven before the verse number 19, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Would you say he's been humbled? I think he's been humbled. Make me as one of thy hired servants. He's been so humbled, he's going to be a servant. You know, in England, I guess still olden days, you had upstairs and downstairs. All the servants lived downstairs, and upstairs would ring a bell, and a certain bell meant a certain room needs attention. And they come scurrying upstairs like mice, and then, yes, they serve their master. Well, he was willing to be a servant. Just serve. If you disown me, Father, it's okay. As long, but I just want to. And so that's his attitude. Now, verse number 20. And he arose and came to his father. We're coming to the point. He arose and came to his father, but when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Verse 22. But the father said unto his servants, Bring forth the best robes and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. I guess he had nothing. He left with a nice pair of leather boots or whatever, and now he comes back with nothing. He's coming back barefoot. He's coming back with his shirt all torn. He's coming back all facial hair overgrown. Looks like an animal. He comes back with nothing, but he went out with a lot. Came back with nothing. That's what the world does to us. It strips us of anything that is decent, anything that is good and moral and right and holy. Holy, holy, holy. The world takes away that holiness from us. If you're not careful, you get so much into the world and you lose this sense of God is holy, I should be holy as well. He lost everything. He came back with nothing, barefoot. And, where am I? Verse number 23. And bring hither the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. Don't you know that was music to the son's ears? Had nothing to eat. Had nothing to eat. Nothing to wear, just about. Verse 24. For this my son is dead, or was dead, and is alive again, and was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. Now, what happened here when the father welcomed his son back? What is it about the Father that reminds you about our Heavenly Father? Now, let me ask you this. Did you hear the Father say, when the Son said, and he's talking out loud, and he says, I have sinned again, I'm no worthy to call it Son. Verse 22, but the Father said to his servants, the Father did something quite opposite of what we would do. If that boy came crawling home, we would say, what are you doing back home? What are you doing here? Who invited you over here? Who made you leave a year and a half ago, if it was? I didn't tell you to leave. I didn't want to give you the inheritance, but you demanded it, and you spent it all, didn't you? Didn't you? You blew it, didn't you? Yes, you did. Now, here's your son over here. He's just, and the father's over there on the porch like this. Yeah, you want to come back home now? You do, huh? I knew you would. You should have known better. You should never have done that. Boy, you have brought so much shame to this family. Every time I went to the market, went downtown, they asked me about my boy, you. I had to say, I don't know where he is. I had to tell them that you want everything now, that you are greedy and selfish, that you just didn't listen to what I said. You brought so much shame to me. You know that? Now, did he say that to him? Did he have a right to say that to him? If he had said that to him, he would not have been wrong at every point. At every point, the father would have been exactly accurate about what he would criticize his son about. But that's not what he said. The son didn't need that. The son needed a chance to make up. The son needed a chance to crawl back home. And that's mercy that the father expressed to him. He doesn't do what some of us may do. Build ourselves up because we're right, and point a finger at that guy and tell him, I told you, you know better than that. You made your bed, you slept in it, too bad. You got the fleas because you lay down with dogs. Everything would have been accurate, but that's not what the Father did. He will not always chide. He has not dealt with us after our sins. Psalm 103. Do you realize in our homes there is something that's got to be there, and it's called mercy, and it's called grace. Those are two ingredients you're going to have in your home. Now, here's another chapter. Go to John chapter 8. John chapter 8. John chapter 8. Those Pharisees, they try to catch Jesus in his words, don't they? Didn't they? They tried to trip him up. They posed questions that were not sincere questions they didn't want any answers. They just wanted to trip him up in his answers and say, I caught him in his words. He was wrong. Yeah. We pay tribute to Caesar or to God. What do we do here? Let's see what he says. And if he says this, we'll say this. If he says this, we'll say that. They tried to trick him. They're not sincere. They just want to hear something so they could criticize him. Chapter 8 of John, the chapter is a story about a woman who has done wrong, she sinned. Come to verse number 3. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. It is still called adultery. It is still sinful, it's still wrong. Adultery, and when they had set her in the midst, these Pharisees, these men, they said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned, but what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. Right in that, next to that Bible verse, say, he ignored them. They wanted to fight, he just said, yeah, you're going to fight on me. I'm just going to write something on the ground here. And verse number 7, so when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, he that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. Verse 8, and again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Now was he not the master teacher? Was he not the expert in getting people's attention and getting them to see things for themselves? He wasn't just lecturing them. He was teaching them something, and they got the point. Look at verse number 9. And they which heard it, being convinced by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last, and Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. Can you picture this? What a dramatic scene this is. There's so much you can speculate about what he wrote in the sand. My point is not to speculate about what he wrote in the sand. My point is this, verse number 10. When Jesus had lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, you shouldn't have done that. You should be stoned for your adultery. You should be executed. You did wrong. You're such a bad, evil, vile woman. He said, woman, where are those thine accusers? Who hath no man condemned thee? Verse 11. And she said, no man, Lord. And Jesus saith unto her, neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. What did he do? Well, you know what he did. If there was an example, if there's a model that we look to for mercy and grace, that's right here. The Lord himself. Now, I have to tell you this because some may think that mercy and grace is a cover. It is licensed to do wrong. But he told her, go and sin no more. He acknowledged what she did was wrong. And he said, look, okay, it's done. Don't do it anymore. He acknowledged it as a sin. And he said, stop it. Just because there's mercy and grace does not mean you continue doing something wrong. Mercy and grace has been the word used to justify all kinds of bad behavior. I was shocked to read this because I know one of these people. At least I've heard his music. Years ago, Nathan heard his music years ago. We liked the singing of he and his brother and his father years ago. They retired in 2001. But before I get to him, he now goes to a church in Kentucky. Listen to this. The words tell a lot. We are united in our diversity to love and serve in God's world. Listen to this now. Listen carefully. We may be a little different than other churches you might visit, and we hope you feel it when you join us in person. We are an inclusive and affirming spiritual community. Seeking to live out a more just and right, generous Christianity by putting words into action with community outreach in social advocacy. At the name of this church, we think that faith is less about doctrines and dogmas demanding total agreement and more about a life to be lived, enjoyed, and shared with others. Now, isn't that real sweet? That's really sweet, isn't it? That is so non-offensive. I'm not for offending people unnecessarily. Our theology is progressive. Changes, shifts with the culture. Our theology is progressive. We welcome the entire human family. Well, that sounds really good. So do we. We welcome the entire human family regardless of race, age, creed, physical abilities. Now, you're going to have a disclaimer if you have a school or some kind of ministry that we don't discriminate against race, gender, things like that. But they add to this, race, gender, age, creed, physical abilities, marital or economic status, gender identification, okay, or your orientation. You see where this has gone? We are an open and affirming congregation. Now here's a word from the pastor. This has some bearing to this. After a 20-year career in accounting and human resources, Marcia answered the call to ministry and raised in a suburban SBC church, Southern Baptist Church. She studied scripture and theology. In an effort to reconcile the message of exclusivity and rejection that she had heard in more conservative traditional denominations. As her faith developed, progressive, she had deep questions of how God works in the world and in the hearts and minds of believers and seekers alike. Marcia lives with her wife, Brenda, and her 2 dogs. The pastor of the church. She founded the church in a southern city. Our church is a welcoming place of worship and community where I can, let me skip that. I am committed to advocacy for a variety of social justice issues in our community and in our world. I believe God's Spirit will lead us to listen, learn, and grow in faith. That seems to be our problem. When we say some things are wrong, we haven't grown in our faith. Grow in our faith so that we can extend God's message of inclusivity, love, grace. Grace, there's that word, grace. Grace, hope, and peace to all, and specifically to those who have been traditionally rejected or turned off by organized religion or churches. We've come to the core of this church and these people. In the name of grace, we open our arms to things that are known to be wrong. Well, he says, go and sin no more. Now, that's from the pastor who's living with the woman. Here's the associate pastor. I'll just creep this. She's a champion of the underdog and roots for those who have been disenfranchised, the downtrodden, and so on. And I err on the side of mercy always and believe grace is a gift I've received and should give. I believe all are connected by some invisible force of mystical love. Mystical love. Pam Miller. And then to the friend, not the friend, but the man that I have heard, listened to in some Southern gospel music years ago. After traveling with his father and brother, singing music, winning many awards, Dove Awards and all these kind of things, they retired, and then he came back. He came back with a renewed spirit, a refocused mission, a task of telling God's story of unqualified grace. Unqualified grace. 3 times I've given you the word grace. Unqualified grace. It used to be unconditional love, unconditional grace, unqualified grace. Today, Kenny's faith has been remade because it's progressive. It's been remade and reshaped because it's progressive. But what he feels is a more inspired and informed version of God that includes more than it excludes. And that's very professionally written. That's very well written. It happens to be wrong, but it's well written. He currently lives in Lexington with his husband, Mason, dog and cat. You know that's wrong if you have a dog and a cat. He lives in Lexington, Kentucky with his husband. He divorced his wife for 15 years to marry a man because his faith is growing. And he has an inspired and informed version of God. So goody for him and for them. For me, it was life-changing, life-saving discovery when I realized that God has a place for me in the good work of the gospel. It's liberating and empowering and refreshing to not only know it, but to be able to spread the news of God's fantastic and unquenchable love. Now, what's the point? When the Lord forgave, when the Lord had mercy on this woman, it's not the same thing as what these guys are talking about, grace. Grace is not permissive. Grace, mercy is not do as you please. Grace and mercy is not I can because why not? No. There is wrongdoing. There is sin here. And in both cases, prodigal son, he did wrong. This woman did wrong. And both of them received mercy. Mercy and grace. Grace is you get something you don't deserve. Forgiveness. Mercy is that you don't get something you deserve. Judgment. And so both are at work here in Jesus dealing with this woman. And with the parable of that prodigal son, you have the same thing. The Father is a portrait of how Jesus Christ, how God the Father treats us. Are you not glad that when you get to heaven, you are not able to say, Lord, I'm here. Bless your heart, Lord. I'm here because I have earned it. You know, you cannot say that. You cannot even say this. Lord, I'm in heaven because I believe in your Son and I also did my part. You cannot say that. If it's grace, it's of grace. If it's works, it's of work. It cannot be a combination of both. Romans 3 and 4 tells us about these things, about justification, imputation, and it's either grace or it's either works. And it's not works. It doesn't work. Works, grace is grace. Works cannot work. It fails. And so if it's grace, we're there because, not because we are Baptist, because I was in church 52 Sundays a year. No, not because of that. It's not by any good things we have done, small or large. I sacrificed, God. Don't you know I sacrificed? I gave a lot of money to help. Lord, I swept the floors, I mopped the floors, I scrubbed. No, it's not that at all. But don't you know, Lord, I was there for every meeting that when they had a special... No, not at all. No, those things are all good, but it has nothing to do with your salvation, because salvation is all of grace. It's all of grace. But did we deserve it is my point. The answer is no. Now, in your families, when your kids act up, and when you act up, and your husband acts up, and everybody, even the dog acts up, and you feel like taking the dog back to the Humane Society, which happens, just won't stop barking. Sometimes he won't stop barking. Sometimes she won't stop barking. Sometimes kids won't stop barking. I want to return them to where they came from. No, you can't do that. And our flesh just wants to react in a fleshly way. Somehow we have to look to our example of mercy and grace. That is a good foundation to stand on when it comes to our families. You know, I said earlier, we all are flawed. Boy, is that ever true. You know, I'm talking about mercy and grace today because I need it, because I'm not so merciful and graceful sometimes. I can be having 23 hours of a good day, but then one thing happens on the 24th hour, and it just throws me for a loop. Are you like me sometimes? Are you more spiritual than anybody else like in this world? I mean, really, we don't intend to lose it, but we do lose it. I mean, I can say just the other day, and that'll be accurate. I can say just last week, that'll be accurate. Well, this and that, and it'll be all accurate. And when I look back to last week and to a few days ago, or whenever I, it's because I have found myself in a position where I just have forgotten how the Lord treated people who were wrong. And do people deserve mercy from me? No. Do I deserve? No. In either cases, no. But we get it because of grace and mercy. It's there for us. God treats us that way. I caution, it's not to say that we can do as we please. It is not to be, as these examples here that I read to you, is not to say that we can just disregard what the Bible says. That's not the reason for mercy and grace. The reason for mercy and grace is because when people fail, there has to be a way for people to do right again. There has to be an opportunity for us to get back in the good graces of other people. That woman who had committed adultery, and the Lord says, go and sin no more, I think she didn't do that anymore. I just suspect that look, you can talk about mercy and grace all you want to, and theologically dissect everything, every single aspect of mercy and grace, but never have it in your home. What good is that? To be right theologically, to be right about, well, grace means this and mercy means this, and da. But if you don't have it in your home, in your heart, in your life, toward your family members, what good is it? Do you see what I'm trying to explain? It's not talking about it and saying this and saying that. It is about, okay, having some self-control, so that you actually live and follow your example of the Lord Jesus Christ about having grace and mercy. All right? Now, I want to also say that if you think that you cannot handle grace and mercy because you just can't, just remember this. We're all so flawed. We all have such a nature in which it kind of tends toward, no one's going to show me up. No one's going to prove me wrong. No one's going to ever do that to me. And I'm not going to be, no. You see, you got to understand, you have to really remember this, that it is a Christ-like characteristic for you to have mercy and grace. Look at Ephesians chapter 4. You may not like this verse, but the verse is there. Ephesians chapter 4. And verse number 31 and 32. These verses it should be so common to all of us. Verse 31 says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you. Why? Because Psalm 103 tells us why. Because of Luke 15, it tells us why. Because of John chapter 8, it tells us why. The Lord didn't treat people who offended him like that. In verse 32, and be ye kind one to another. Why? Tenderhearted. Why? Forgive one another. Why? Answer, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. Now, the prodigal son needed forgiveness. Didn't he? Was he not humble? Yes. Did he not know he was wrong? Yes. And when he came back to his father, when he crawled back to the ranch, to the estate, do you not know perhaps that he was not sure how his father would receive him? Therefore, in his mind, he's playing all this, take me back, Father, please take me back. Please, please, I'm willing to be a slave servant. Please take me back. I'll work the field, sleep on the barn if I have to, but please let me come back home. And the father just, because he loved him, and because he displayed Christ-like reaction to his wayward son, he just said, come here, you. And gave him a hug. He says, man, you stink. Good. Now, when's the last time you had a bath? Oh, sorry, boy, but when's the last time you had a bath? I don't remember. You smell like a pig. I was living with pigs. What happened to your clothes? They tore it up. Where's your shoes? The hogs ate them. Oh, man. Look, we're gonna have a barbecue free, but first thing is go home, get into the house, get hot water, and use soap, lots of soap. Shampoo your hair, shampoo your beard, shave. After you're done, take your time. Take your time. Don't rush. Every inch scrub. Use a green pad. Clean up real good. All right, dry off real good. Get some clothes that's been washed. Oh, Dad, I don't remember wearing any washed clothes for such a long time. I don't know what it's like. Son, they're 100% cotton. Best kind of shirts to wear. And your underwear, 100% cotton, Hanes brand. No polyester, 100% cotton. So the boy gets something he doesn't deserve. He comes out, has a barbecue. Everybody's happy except one family member. You know who that is. Everybody's happy. The servants are somewhat happy. And it smells so good around that house. On that ranch, that estate, it just, oh man, as the sun went down, they're sitting there. Someone's playing a ukulele guitar. And maybe somebody's singing Amazing Grace. Or maybe someone's playing a harp. And there's a happiness there. It's a celebration. Someone who was lost, considered dead, is now returned home. And the father's sitting over here, and he's saying, looking at his son, there's a big fire going, and looking at his boy saying, man, I can't imagine what he went through, but that fool of a son of mine, well, what a waste he was. Year and a half, 18 months, I don't know, I lost track. But every day I went out to the porch looking for that boy on the horizon. And for although these months I've been so disappointed, but there he is, sitting right over here. He's laughing. He's talking with the servants. The servants all know him. The servants were raised up with him. They've been here a long time. And they're talking with him. And it's so nice to see him smiling. It's so nice to see him with a full belly. It's so nice to hear him laugh. Come here, son. Son comes over here. Yes, Dad. He says, son, I bet you're ready for bed. He says, Dad, I'm exhausted. That was a long walk. GPS says it'll take me half an hour by car. It'll take me 2 hours by bus. And by foot, it's going to take about 5 days. I'm so tired. He said, you know what? Come here, servant. Yes, Lord, sir. Take him back to his old room. Take him back to his old room. And what's the word that you use when maids fix the bed, pull the sheet back, the cover back? There's a word for that. Turn down service. The boy goes, he says, good night, Dad. Gives his dad a hug. The father hugs him a little longer because he smells okay now. Good night, Dad. Good night, son. Glad you're home. The boy turns and says, you don't know how happy I am to be home, Dad. So he goes to his bed. He goes to his bedroom. And he sees his bed turned down. He sees 3 pillows there. He sees a little lamp burning. Lamp. candle. And he walks over. There's a little mat next to his bed. He sits on his bed, takes off his shoes. He slips into the bed, pulls the cover over him. Up over here like this. He says, oh, this feels so good. And before he can think anymore, he falls asleep. Next morning, he wakes up. It's kind of like Mephibosheth in 2 Samuel chapter 9. He wakes up, he says, oh, I'm not in a far country anymore. I'm home, in my own bed. He looks around, he sees his old drawer, chest of drawers. He sees the pictures of a P-51 Mustang on the wall still. He sees a slingshot on the dresser. He sees some of his paraphernalia as a little boy. He sees all these things. He says, I'm home. You know why he's home? He's home because his father had mercy on him. His father had grace. His father gave him something he didn't deserve. His father did not give him something that he deserved. He deserved chastisement. He deserved to hold a sign out in the street that says, I'm a wayward son. I'm a bad boy. No, he deserved that. But grace gave him something he didn't deserve. Mercy did not give him what he deserved. So he's back to his father's house. And I don't know how he lived out the rest of his life, but I know one thing from this chapter, everything was okay. Because he's back home because his father welcomed him. Now, you can take that in several ways, but let's apply it like this. In our homes, when there is something wrong that is done, when there is something that is not proper, not right, we need to have forgiveness. We need to express that. We need to have mercy and grace. We also need to fix what we can fix. So this is not an excuse to let things slide when things can be fixed. For example, do you sometimes irritate your spouse? I'm not asking really answers, okay? But do you sometimes irritate your spouse? The answer obviously is, now it's not about who's more irritable and who's more irritating. It's a matter of fact, we irritate each other. And when we do, we should, if your wife says to you, I wish you wouldn't do that. And if you say, you know what, that's what I am. This is who I am. I do what I want to do. I wish you wouldn't do that. Bothers me. Now, when she does something that you don't like and you say, I wish you wouldn't do that. What? What am I doing wrong? Well, it's not really wrong. It's just irritating to me. I wish you wouldn't do that. Why? That's just the way I am. What have you got now? You got a woman who just says, that's just the way I am. You get a guy who says, that's just the way I am. What's going to happen? What about putting up a barrier right now, putting up a wall between you two? What about if the wall was like a set of 1 by 10s, 1 inch thick, 10 inches wide, 6 feet tall. So let's say every time you do something like that, you're putting up between you two a 1 by 10. And if it could stand up by itself, 1 by 10, another 1 by 10, another 1 by 10, because you have a right and a reason to be what you are. But you know it irritates her, she irritates you. And you put up all these planks, all these 1 by 10s. You've got a big barrier between you two now. You know what you do? You know what you got to do? You got to stop doing that. And so if I were to give, I wish I had 1 by 10s. If I were to give Miranda 1 by 10 and she gave me a 1 by 10 and I have 10 1 by 10s and she has 12 1 by 10s, because I probably irritate her more than she irritates me. But that's debatable. I've got all these planks over here. All these planks represent resentments, bad feelings, friction. Have you ever done that in home? You know what that is all about? You're really irritated. And you just can't sit. You just, and then you go, and your eyes go like this. And you turn around with these planks, these 1 by 10s. Now, these 1 by 10s, if you keep holding on to them, it's going to get kind of weary on your arms. It's kind of uncomfortable. What you got to do is do one thing. You have to do one thing. If you're carrying these 1 by 10s, these irritations with you because you have a right to be irritated and you're not going to change your ways, you're not going to be responsible, you're going to be really having a bad home. You got to drop them. Boom. Drop them. And think about the one example you have to follow that helps you to overcome carrying these things. John chapter 8, Luke chapter 15. Remember what they did. Remember what our Lord did. How he responded to things that offended him. I'm just talking about irritations. I'm talking about real offenses. But if you want to be happier in your home or have a more peaceful home, you'll have to be responsible and drop some things and defer to your spouse and vice versa. Now, we all came up in a certain lifestyle, a certain way of being raised. Okay, we all did. It's still with us. It's still with me. It's still with you. My wife's upbringing is quite different from mine. And her upbringing was always, I love you, love you, love you, bye, Shug, love you, bye, love you, love you, love you, love you, love you, love you. So my upbringing is where the word love has been omitted from the vocabulary. I heard, what'd you do that? What'd you do that for? I heard so much growing up. We all did. Stupid. You don't want to do that. What's the matter, you dumbhead? Did I ever hear the L word growing up? Now you're married to her. I mean, before I married her, Randy Camp, love you. To Nancy, love you, Shug. Love you, Shug. Shug. Sugar. Love you, Shug. And I'm thinking, what kind of family is this? When you marry someone, you're married to their family. I'm thinking, what am I marrying into here? Shug. I never heard the word shug before. I never heard the word tater before. A mater. It's tomato. It's potato, not mater taters. It's not shug, it's sugar. Honey? Honey comes in a jar and bottle. What is honey business? Okay, it's a shock to my cultural system. So we get married, we grow up together as husband and wife with this dichotomy, with this great big difference. Yes, love, yes, but every day, what a difference. Two people, flawed, married together, to death do us part, and sometimes death would have been easier. I'm simply saying, the way we are raised has affected us as adults. It's affected you as adults. And you're going to have some mercy and some grace to deal with those differences, because they're going to come up every once in a while. And if I were to cite to you what happened the other week, my fault, you'd say, well, I got no respect for you, Pastor. It would be true, because I just totally... Blah. So it's very difficult for me to talk about mercy and grace, because I never grew up with it. Mercy and grace were not relatives to mine. I never knew my uncles. I never knew my aunties. I never knew mercy and grace. They weren't even in the house. They weren't even passing by. They were in a different county. They were in a different state. State of somewhere else. So then I married somebody who has a lot of mercy and grace and love, and a lot of shug. And it's just a real transition, a real adjustment. And so she's had to have a lot of mercy and grace toward me. And I've had to have a lot of that toward, because we don't always understand each other. I want to be right, but she wants to be right. Most of the time she is. Sometimes I am. But our brains do not function the same. They do function, but they don't function the same. We don't always see things the same. You ever ask a woman about something and she'll give you all the details that's not necessary? She'll give you all the becauses and the whys. And then she'll ask questions like, well, if we do this, then will this happen? And she's trying to be tactful because she don't want to hurt your feelings as the man, because you're the leader of the house, but you're not always right. But we think we're always right. Well, if we do this, then what about that? And oh. So what about that? Well, if you chop down that tree, we won't have any more mangoes. Yeah, but then we won't have any more leaves in the ground to rake. So let's cut it down. But then we won't have any more fruit. Well, but then we won't have any more leaves. So let's argue about that. I don't want to rake up leaves anymore, but you want the fruit. What am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to work with that and be more Christ-like in my... You see? You need to have mercy and grace in your life. And then the details follow. But it all comes back to having that Christ-like response and attitude toward things. Again, I just say, you're not being a pushover if you have mercy and grace. If you're the man, you're the head of the house, you should be. It doesn't mean that you are a pushover. It doesn't mean that at all. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a secret, gentlemen. The secret is this. If you have a good dose of mercy and grace in your life, if you have those two ingredients in your life, your wife, listen, believe me, your wife will walk the ends of the earth for you. She'll make you those brownies that you want. Like that. She'll bake the bread for you just because you were musing and saying, oh man, I hate this bread from McDonald's, not McDonald's, but Walmart or Costco. I mean, it costs like $8 for two. I mean, good night. Honey, I just wish you would make more bread. Next thing you know, you got bread in the oven. You know why? Because you have mercy and grace. And she loves that about you. Now, when you're strong as a man, in every sense of the word, she loves that about you. But I tell you something, women are made such a way that if you've got mercy and grace, boy, she can identify to that. She can identify with that. So don't let your upbringing be a hindrance to your growth as a couple or as a family. You're going to have to be biblical and have a lot of mercy and grace. Now, next time, there's some other ingredients you need to have too. It's not just mercy and grace. There's a combination of things. Because you make brownies, you don't just have to have, you need more than sugar. You need more than flour. You need something else. If you put all sugar, you can't eat if it's all sugar. You gotta add a pinch of salt. But you can't have just salt. You need eggs. You need more than eggs. You need some flour. You need butter, but you need to have melted butter or not melted butter. Room temperature butter. Who would think of these things? Are you going to mix it like that? Or fold it. Not counterclockwise, clockwise. Who thought of that? Some people that don't have a life, they just sit in the laboratory all day long and making all these kind of secret recipes. But if you follow the recipe, generally speaking, it'll come out like it's supposed to be. Did you know that sometimes if you're off just by a little bit, let's see, what's the measurements? You got spoons like ounces, 2 ounces, 4 ounces, whatever, like that. If you're off by an ounce, sometimes it affects the texture of the bread or a texture of whatever you're making. It affects it. How come it's so dry? Oh, I must have put, you see, I put only short on something or too much on something. It affects it. So I'm using that as a figure, as a simile about ingredients for our homes. Okay? I hope that was helpful today. Now, there's more ingredients to add to our homes. Okay?